ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, fellow pandemic travelers. This is Seattle Pandemic Shutdown Day 84, I believe. Or is it 85? Dang it, I looked before I started and I don't remember now. Well, anyway, it's my birthday. Thoughts and prayers. Send me Venmo, money on my Venmo, whatever. Anyways, what do we got going on today? Well, what is this? Thursday? And another beautiful day in Seattle. Unfortunately, people are still supposed to stay home. And once again, I maintain that we're not really in phase 1 anymore. Functionally, we're in like phase 2. Maybe more, I don't know. It's hard to say. But there's just more people out, more stuff going on. I see people in the park. You know, it's getting, we're coming back to something like normal. You know, something like normal. But, of course, the big news, Minneapolis, Minnesota, burned last night. Was it like a downtown area? But then, you know, so it was the, what's his name? Not George Michael. George Floyd was his name. I mentioned it yesterday. I said, oh no, this is a bad looking video right here. It's what is essentially a snuff film that was making the rounds on Twitter. Seems to show these officers just kneeling on this guy's neck for an excessive amount of time, and then he loses consciousness, and then he later expired from this treatment. And I mean, there are situations where you can justify all kinds of use of force, lethal force, less than lethal force, you know. But it doesn't appear as though it's justified thus far. Like, it seemed as though he was handcuffed, I think. So he's handcuffed and he's on the ground. And you have tasers and pepper spray, and there's like multiple officers there. And so you're leaning on his neck with your knee, and for some reason, it doesn't seem necessary. And then he dies. And then, you know, that's a pretty good way to kick off a riot, which is pretty much what happened. And how these things have always gone down, at least the last decade or so of these kinds of police protests, let's call them. I don't really want to say Black Lives Matter because that is one angle on what it is. There's also just, you know, police reform activists and whatnot. There's a legitimate outcry or an outburst of anger. People demonstrate their, you know, otherwise First Amendment right to peaceably assemble and seek a redress of grievances from the government and whatnot. And they gather and they protest. Then what happens is the day grinds on, someone breaks something, at which point a rabble-rouser of one kind or another does something like break something. And we're stopped on I-5 again, by the way. They do something like break something, or they assault an officer, or it's alleged that they assault an officer. Somebody does something stupid. And the result is that the police then order that the gathering is no longer legal, and then they demand everybody disperse, at which point those who do not want to won't, and those who wanted to fight will fight. And by that I mean they come wearing helmets and goggles and maybe have a stick. They come with medical supplies to treat each other if they get sprayed in the face with pepper spray and stuff like that. Now, they fully have the right to do that, in my opinion. I mean, go go for it. Knock yourself out. Getting pepper sprayed and then, I don't know, tased and getting your ass kicked and getting arrested, even if people will pay for your bail. I don't know. That doesn't seem like a whole lot of fun to me. But the issue is what happens next, which is the bedlam that follows when law enforcement basically say, okay, well, we broke up the thing, or we tried to, and it's now out of control, and we're pulling back so we don't get hurt. Okay, have at it. And then the looting starts. And the issue here is whether or not there were looters there from the beginning who just are looting. Like, does the looting just happen every time? Or do people seize upon the chaos and come and loot? Because it seems like there's some of both. There are people who are there who know that there's going to be looting later, and then there are people who come later, right? And then they have little to do with whatever the actual protest was. And they want to take TVs and things. And these clips that you see going around like Twitter and social media of people like ransacking TVs and stuff from like a Target, and like this Target just got absolutely ransacked. I mean, it's just they're breaking the self-check machines, and the place is just trash. And then they set it on fire, and the poor AutoZone just looted and ransacked and set ablaze. And then apparently a Wendy's and a Cubs. I don't know what a Cubs is. And somebody pointed out that they looted the dollar store. And it took me a second to just say, really? Like, you're gonna loot stuff from the dollar store? I mean, come on. Like, it costs $1. Oh, God. Anyways, the issue with all of this is, what exactly are people doing? Like, what is this? Like, is this just an excuse to loot? Is the looting somehow part of the message? They burned down like a low-income housing block, like a building. I think it was being built. They burnt that down. Now there's less homes, you know? Oh, no. No. No answering calls right now. Yeah, so what exactly is what does the looting do? What is that for? Because it's not a good look. It looks like there were people who cared that this guy was killed by the police unjustly, which certainly looks like it is. And it seems like most everyone agrees that, like, it really doesn't look good, and they need to, like, the FBI is investigating and stuff. But it's like, they want the police arrested immediately, and you're like, yeah, but there's, like, the police have procedures for this specifically because they get involved with violence with the public essentially on a regular basis. You can argue the merits of that concept, but it's like one complaint doesn't equal an arrest of an officer, because they constantly are making people mad by, essentially interacting with them in ways that often become violent, and they're punitive, and so people don't like them. So regardless of whether people complain or not, you have to have a process where you're not constantly like arresting the suspect and then the officer because the suspect said the officer did something wrong, and then you start an investigation. It doesn't work like that. Now, in this instance, you've got video of what it looks like is murder, but the issue is they'll probably push for something more like manslaughter or, like negligent homicide, right? Because you can get that. Calling it murder, I think they have to prove intent or premeditation or something like that. So people might not be happy with the ultimate charges and prosecution in that, in that regard. Again, I'm not a lawyer. I just, give free legal advice on the internet, right? I think that that's kind of more what's going to happen. Now, there is supposedly this body camera footage, but I don't really see, I don't see how more context is going to make it really look better. like, it seems like they already had him restrained and just used excessive force, and it just seems like it's sort of blatant. It's just sort of like, it just seems obviously like, what are you doing? Like, you're not in any danger. He's not doing anything. He's just saying he can't breathe, and you're leaning on his neck. And then he stops breathing and he loses consciousness. And like I think I said yesterday, like, rendering a suspect unconscious is not part of an arrest. Like, in fact, you want them to be conscious so that they can answer questions and fill out paperwork and, be cooperative. A basically dead body is not very cooperative, if you know what I mean. So, yeah, I mean, and of course there's this racial angle, and I understand the racial angle is important to the story, right? This is the continuation of the kind of Black Lives Matter argument that we had for years, and then we haven't anymore for whatever reason. That kind of evaporated for whatever reason, which I also, I think, mentioned yesterday. And so, but one of the issues is that I would like people to not just fixate on the racial part. I would like people to pay attention to it's that warrior cop thing, that Thaddeus Russell kind of thing. It's the anarchist thing. It's like, look at what we've subjected ourselves to by having law enforcement and enforcing these laws that we pass, and in this way, right? And that's everything too. It's feds, you watch Waco, you watch Ruby Ridge, you look at these incidents. Those are high profile incidents. Then you look at the day-to-day policing of various, cities and stuff, and you have this situation where every time an officer is interacting with someone, it's an armed confrontation because the officers are always armed. Now, this is an argument that people make in, Europe and stuff, that like their police aren't armed, and so they don't have these same kinds of problems. And I understand that argument, but Americans are armed. And so, like we drive cars, and sometimes we drive fast cars. So the police also kind of have fast cars so that they can chase other fast cars when there's a commission of a crime, right? So we play this game of giving the police the things they need to police Americans specifically. And the result is, again, every confrontation with an officer is an armed confrontation. Now, in this specific case, it doesn't seem like any weapons were used. Maybe he was tased or something before they subdued him on the ground, but he wasn't shot. He was strangled to death. So this wasn't a negligent discharge. This wasn't a jumpy cop shoots somebody unreasonably. This was, they already had him on the ground, and for whatever reason, didn't heed his pleas to be, let up. And that's still them coming and confronting this man, multiple officers, and taking him into custody. That's like the joke is essentially kidnapping, right? They kidnap you and lock you in a box, and then they make you do paperwork and explain yourself to a judge, presumably. And this is what we call policing in America, but every time an officer is handling a suspect, there's potentially lethal force involved. So we get these incidents, right? And then you can sometimes justify lethal force even as a non-officer, right? Even as a official, like you can just justify lethal force in various contexts, right? But in this context, it doesn't seem like it's reasonable. And so people are mad. I mean, like, I'm not really seeing many people just trying to justify this, because you just look at the video and you're just like, oh my God, what are you guys doing? What is this? And now we have race riots. And so there's nothing like having a good race riot in the middle of a pandemic to really get the masses out, and many of them not wearing masks, so, and not socially distancing during a riot, you know, and burning things down. And now those jobs are gone. And then what happens is businesses don't really want to come back to those areas, for obvious reasons. And now the communities sort of trust each other less, and they don't like each other, and then we just sort of rinse and repeat, and then we'll kind of do this again in a few years because we live in hell. Yeah, something like that. Anyways, they're protesting again today, and there was looting in St. Paul, which is, I guess, a twin city. The Twin Cities? Is that what they are? So they're rioting and looting in St. Paul, so it spread to another city. And then, you know, same question. Is this reasonable protest that does something, or is this just opportunism and people wanting to get free shit? You know? I don't know. I don't think it's helpful. But then again, the thing is that the demonstrations just would happen and be like, oh, yeah, a bunch of people with signs, and then they'd leave. And then that would just be the story, right? The story would be, there were some people with signs, and then they went home. Now it's, the National Guard is getting deployed. Now you're making news waves, right? I don't know. Not a good time for all of this to have happened. And again, will we actually reform law enforcement in some meaningful way to avoid these kinds of things in the future? Will the body camera footage exonerate these officers? Tune in next time. Same bat place, same bat channel. Alright, that's enough from me. You probably already know all this if you're online, but alright, we will see what happens. Remember, I go out so that increasingly fewer of you don't have to. Wait, did I say that right? Anyways, bye.